Red Bull have finally shown their hand for the upcoming 2023 Formula One season, as their RB19 has finally been revealed to the world in Bahrain this morning. Bearing striking similarities to last year's most successful Formula One car of all time, you could understand why. Because why change a winning formula? But if we go over the car from the front to the rear, there are many subtle changes and refinements that have taken place, as you would expect from the reigning world champions, who have the mighty Adrian Newey working his magic, while also having parts on the car that do not look like they will be the finished article, and I would no doubt expect to see them updated either in the next couple of days or for the first Grand Prix next weekend here in Bahrain. But before we move any further into the video, if you're new around here, consider subscribing to the channel, as I will be creating much more content around all the Formula One teams and of course the upcoming preseason tests. I plan on having videos out every hour or every 2 hours throughout those 3 days in Bahrain. So without further ado, let's jump right into the car and go over everything that has changed on the RB19. Right, so let's start at the front end of the car, specifically with the front wing. So what's really interesting to me is there's not been a massive evolution of it. You know, I was really expecting to see something quite drastically different, particularly at the front end, and they haven't done that. Perhaps this is something to be, looked out for in the early part of the season, and we will see such a change. But having said that, there are still a few slight changes that have taken place. So there's been a complete redesign of the two upper elements on the front wing. And also there's a slight reprofiling of how the nose looks. And then finally, moving on to the end plates, there's been a small winglet added to it, which is something both Mercedes and Haas have done thus far in 2023. Also, the splitter on the RB19 has been updated with a larger leading edge surface area. There's also a real T-tray there now, and it looks like the ECU cooling outlet has also been modified. Moving further back to the sidepods as well as the floor, this is where quite a lot of work has taken place in the winter. You might not necessarily think so at first glance, because yes, the sidepod's shape and design itself is exactly identical to that of last year, but what they have done is made sure the undercut of the sidepod now continues for the entire length of it. So of course this is going to have an impact on the flow structures and where the air now goes towards the back of the diffuser as well as the rear ring. As well, with the new regulation changes for this year on the floor itself having to be raised by 15mm, teams were having to obviously naturally find a different way to kind of make up for the loss in lap time. And it's really interesting to see the floor edge details on this new RB19 that have taken place. For me, this is the most intricate floor edge details that we've gotten thus far from the entire paddock. And also there's a new updated rear floor edge as well towards the back end of the RB19. Now, one other thing that I did note, which I was kind of perplexed by, and this is very much similar to how the RB18 started off at the beginning of last season, was it kind of looked unfinished, particularly at the front end portion of the Venturi tunnels. It almost seems like there's a piece of bodywork that could be taken off. Now, whether I'm kind of reading too much into that, I don't know, but if that's the case, maybe there's some sort of update that they have planned, and maybe an S-duct could be in the works. I really don't know if I'm clutching at straws there, but there's something that did, occur to me when I was looking through the pictures this morning of the RB19. And then I just wanted to put a, direct comparison between that of the RB18 and RB19 to further showcase how the undercuts on this year's car has been taken to further extremes. So it's quite naturally obvious that they've had a redesign of the internals, most specifically with the radiators, I would say, in the packaging, to accommodate for this change. And another thing that I've already seen very early on in testing is the fact that they've done a lot of Flovis paint over these areas, and so here's a photo of that to further showcase this change in the Sidepod undercut. And also, this isn't the first time a Red Bull car, or at least one of the two Red Bull teams, has had a complete undercut of their Sidepod. In AlphaTauri's former guys as Toro Rosso, the STR6 was the first car that I can remember off the top of my head that had a full undercut on their Sidepod. So yeah, something to kind of note, and it's quite interesting to point out. So this is something, obviously, the teams between the two of them have in their kind of DNA. Now, as for the mirrors on the RB19, they are absolutely basic, so I would not be surprised in the slightest to see those kind of be changed over the next couple of days in the preseason testing, or if not during the test, and of course, early on in the season, because if you look at most of the other teams, they've got very much so a lot more of an intricate, detailed design with actual kind of aerodynamic pieces to them that are obviously helping with the turbulence and guide airflow through them. Even Haas have that. So yeah, that is something I would, really expect to see Red Bull bring as part of their updates to this car early on in the season. But all in all, I think all these updates are going to help Red Bull make quite a nice step forward. I would say to at least keep them within the same ballpark as Ferrari. I would still expect to see them, leading the way early on in the season. But what's going to be really fascinating is to see how the slashing of their wind tunnel time in comparison to Ferrari and Mercedes plays a role in this year's title race. And of course, add into that fact them, also being fined for overspending last year in the cost cap, which was a further reduction on aero tests, if I remember correctly. So yeah, that is the end of the video, guys. I hope you've all enjoyed it. If you have, leave a like on the video, subscribe if you're new around it, and I will catch you all later on today in an update on preseason testing.